Alright, we're going. Alright, let's go. Let's do it. Out of left field, fucking Jojo's on this channel, right? I finished Stone Ocean recently. I'm getting some water because throat burns. I finished Stone Ocean recently. I really liked it. I think it's a very good ending to the 6 parts we've seen. That's why I created this list with only anime villains, because I don't want the manga in here. I don't have anything against the manga, but I haven't read it. So this will be, in case you were curious, here's my personal villain tier list. In that order. But that's not what you're here for. What you're here for is this. Right. Who would win between all the main villains of JoJo's in the anime? Alright. So those are two distinctions I want to really emphasize. Who would win is not who is stronger. JoJo's isn't the best at conveying this, but you can lose to someone even if you're faster and stronger. This was made very clear because Pucci had Made in Heaven and still lost to Emporio. You know, because he got caught off guard and tricked or whatever. And the anime versus the manga. I've never read the manga. I tried to read Phantom Blood and it gave me a headache. So we'll be going purely off of the anime. I also did not rewatch the anime for this. So if I'm forgetting anything crucial, let me know. Comment it below. I'd love to hear it. But yeah, so no Funny Valentine, no Diego Brando, no Toru, I believe is Wonder of user. I do think that D4C and Love Train and Wonder of You probably take everyone but one character on this list by default. So, it's kind of interesting. But here's the problem. We need a lot more tiers. So the weakest character on this list, going down to F should be enough. The weakest character on this list, by far, that we're going to throw in the bottom, is going to be Bites the Dust Kira. So this is already where we get into some problems. But Bites the Dust Kira does not have any stand powers. He still has, I believe, Adam Heartfather and Stray Cat, but he doesn't have his own stand to interact with them. So, the reason I'm putting Bites the Dust Kira at the bottom is because I don't mean to say that he's a normal human, because humans in JoJo are not normal people, but there's a part in part 3 where Jotaro gets hit by the world, and it breaks his shoulder, but if that hit a normal person, it would turn them into paste. So, yeah, humans in JoJo are not normal humans, but this is a normal human in JoJo's, and he doesn't have anything against the rest of them. Stray Cat, he can't really use it without having his own stand, and at that, Stray Cat isn't really going to beat anyone else on the list 1-to-1. Neither is Adam Heartfather. If he has his stands, he's stronger, which is why we have all 3 of these as different placements, but yeah. And a tier above him is Dio. Literally, he's a normal dude. What on earth does he do to a vampire? Pretty simple, right? And then next we get to Kira. So why is Kira the worst, right? Why is base Kira the weakest character in the series? This is because everyone else, in some way, shape, or form, either scales physically, in terms of their durability and regeneration, cars, to being above what Kira can handle, or they speed scale above him. So in JoJo's, stands tend to work pretty categorically for the sake of plot convenience. So whenever you're watching a given part, let's say part 5 or part 6, a power type stand is typically going to be relative in strength to another power type stand in that part, so that the main characters can fight against it and progress the plot. Right? And I'm not saying that as a criticism of the show, it's an observation, right? Like how in part 3, Jotaro had a power type stand. So the like other power type stand that really showed up to him in the same way was like the world, right? Now granted, those are some of the highest, like strongest stands ever. But in general, power type stands tend to clump together. And this is important because the 2 instances Kira has where he fights power type stands, he gets speed blitzed and annihilated. He fights a Josuke, and without the influence of Stray Cat or Adam Heartfather, he literally would never have stood a chance. The moment it becomes a direct confrontation between the 2 of them, he literally gets blitzed and hit multiple times before he can react and touch anything. Same with Jotaro. Jotaro is like dying on death's door after not having used his stand for 10 years in Egypt or whatever. And he literally gets blitzed so bad that he's like, it's like he stopped time. And Jotaro didn't use time stop, he just blitzed him that bad. So, the fact that pretty much everyone else on this list gets to in some way scale to Jotaro means that this Kira has literally no chance against any of them just based on speed. Right? And I don't really care if you buy the whole Silver Chariot moves at light speed scaling or whatever. The lucky thing about an inverse tier list is that we don't actually have to argue about like outer verse type feats, right? What the problem is that Kira does not scale to Jotaro, and almost everyone else on the list in some way scales closer to Jotaro than Kira does. Now here's where we get into some funky business, and that's Cars. Cars in his base is really hard to scale. The best we can say is that he should be drastically stronger than like part 1 Dio. There's a direct line of scaling where Dio says that he is like an ascended vampire, and then in part 2 I believe Strizo is his name, says that he has surpassed Dio, and then Strizo himself is like nothing compared to Santana. And then when Stroheim is like, we built ourselves to like tear apart Santana, Cars easily dismisses him and cuts him in half and says Santana was like a dog compared to us. So we know that he's drastically stronger than Dio, but we just have like literally no idea how much faster he is or where his speed scales. We know that he can cut bullets, so he's like hypersonic. But that's not really that impressive, because like Baby's first stand ever can do that. So that doesn't get him very fast. The only thing you can do is try to make up some BS about how his blades reflect light, so that should get him to like that Star Platinum level. The only problem is that's a visual effect, and there's never... He uses it to misdirect his opponents, which would imply that they can't see all the different oscillations at the speed of light, or the light reflections themselves. So if anything, that actually hurts the case that he's Star Platinum level in speed, right? If you want to take that argument. But he should solidly beat Kira. Just because, like, Kira... He'd be able to take anything that sheer heart attack could do, because he could regenerate from that. The question is whether or not Kira could actually touch him with Killer Queen. But I don't think he could. I think Cars is just too good, too fast. More than likely, and durable enough to take anything. But I could see it going either way. We'll actually leave it like right here, because it's more debatable. And the reason why Kira beats Dio by default is because Dio has literally no speed scaling, like ever, to anyone else in the series, so he would just get killed by Killer Queen. One tap. Next is... Who's actually above this? Next up is this Kira. With the help of Adam Heartfather, depending on the terrain, he can fight much better. And with the addition of Stray Cat working in tandem with Killer Queen, he has really powerful range, along with sheer heart attack. And at close range, he's got Killer Queen. So altogether, he's going to be able to stall or pull something out with all of his different arsenal to get above cars. So it was kind of debatable before, kind of weird. And then above this Kira, we should have Doppio. The reason that I have Doppio here, and I have him above this Kira but in the same tier, is because Doppio and Diavolo share the stand body of King Crimson, and they share Epitaph. So Doppio can use the body, he can manifest its arms, and he can use Epitaph. However, given that he can't use King Crimson's ability to skip or erase time, or change fate as it is, we don't actually know how much of King Crimson's power Doppio can use. We do know that he does have a power type stand, and that he has the ability to predict the future. So that should give him enough to allow him to overcome this Kira, because the power type stand should be able to just overcome Kira. Josuke was able to. He used his ability of restoration too. Doppio has the ability to predict the future. Doppio is also an adaptive and intelligent fighter. I know it's weird to put Doppio on here as his own entity, but he is, because he literally fought that entire battle on his own and surprised Diavolo that he could do so well. I do think that his power and his ability should overcome Kira, but it's a little weird, so we'll leave them in the same tier. Also in this tier is going to be Pucci. Actually, both Puccis. The reason I have them here is because these Puccis are weird. They scale around Jolene, who doesn't have much inverse scaling either. It's never shown that Jolene scales very relatively to Star Platinum or anything like that. But Whitesnake Pucci essentially just has the ability to negate anyone's stand, which should beat every stand user except for the ones above him, just by default. And then Seamoon Pucci would literally know all of Pucci's weaknesses and could win. I know that's a little cheap to do that. If you are just interested in who would win, I actually think that Whitesnake is a better stand than Seamoon. At least in its applications in a versus battle tier like this, and especially inverse. I just realized I'm still running that. Whoops. Okay, that was running. Sorry about that, that's really unprofessional. Well, I mean, this entire thing's unprofessional, who cares? But anyways, yeah. I would actually put this Pucci higher, just because he should have the ability to negate, all these characters' abilities. He should be faster and stronger enough to deal with these two by stalling them out for sunlight, or just knocking their memory disk out and, neutralizing them like that. Whitesnake is actually really overpowered inverse for how it affects people. Granted, we don't know if it affects Powermen or vampires, but it should, because they were once human, but that's why it's kind of iffy, and that's why I'm not going to put Pucci. Pucci might honestly just take up his own tier, like Whitesnake Pucci. The ability to just memory and stand null anybody is really, really strong inverse. Alright, let's get these three out of the way and put them all in the same tier before, This should be the order. So, real quick, because I had to look up a few videos for this just to make sure I wasn't completely spewing it out of my mouth right. Dio can be defeated when he has the world. He's not immortal like a vampire. He has some vampiric abilities, But he can be conventionally defeated. If you barrage him hard enough, you can kill him. It's literally what Jotaro does. Because Jotaro defeats him, and then they take his corpse and let it burn in the sun. So Dio is not invincible, right? Diavolo. The reason I have Diavolo above Dio, and I've given this a lot of thought, this is like the real trifecta of the video, right? No one really cares about everyone below this. This is what they're here for. So, in JoJo's, if this was Outerverse and these were 3 different characters interacting, this order would be completely different. But inside of JoJo's, narratively, fate is actually a quantifiable, like, force. And as we know, fate is literally predetermined in JoJo's. Like, the fact that Pucci attained Made in Heaven was fated. The fact that Dio attained the world in a stand at all is fated. So we know that characters in JoJo's are tied to fate. The reason Dio is here is because he's very powerful. The world is, like, potentially the most physically powerful stand in the series. It only seems to be outdone by Star Platinum during Part 3, but after that Jotaro doesn't train. So Dio very likely would win against Jotaro during Parts 4 and 6. Which is actually weird to think about. The main reason Dio is here, though, is stopping time. So stopping time is very powerful. However, stopping time just really doesn't matter in comparison to what we're talking about with Diavolo and Pucci. So the reason I have Diavolo above Dio is because his ability to skip and erase time would negate time stop. Now, this is very weird, and it's really hard to talk about the abilities. The very common thing is, what would Dio see if Dio stopped time, or Diavolo see with the Epitaph if Dio stopped time, right? But what it should boil down to is that time stop happens during stopped time, and he pauses time in between 2 moments in time. This means that it's essentially the same concept as, quantifying what a millisecond is in between seconds. Just so small and imperceptible that you can't really see it. So this means that King Crimson would more than likely just erase the world. If he used the world within that time that he skipped, it would more than likely not do anything. Because of the fact that the actions still quantifiably affect, like, the world. So, like, Dio picks up a bunch of knives and throws them at Jotaro, and then when time unfreezes, Jotaro gets stabbed. I mean, there's that, like, whole fight sequence or whatever where he punches all the knives, but this means that you can still physically interact with and affect the world, like, the outside world, while using the world. This means that those actions can be skipped. We also know that the world can be interacted with by time-based abilities, given how Seamoon Pucci was able to use his ability to affect gravity and fate to see during the time stop during Part 6. We also know that Pucci's Made in Heaven accelerated time stop. So we actually do know that the time stop is affected by things that affect fate, gravity, or time, which are all linked in JoJo's. Diavolo's ability isn't simply to erase time, however, it's actually to alter fate. Diavolo can predict time, and whatever he sees is fated to happen, but he can actually alter and affect his own fate. Inside of JoJo's, that's incredibly powerful. That's why I have him above Dio. However, we know that Pucci was able to affect time stop, and that Pucci himself has accelerated or gained the ability to manipulate gravity and therefore affect fate. This means that Pucci also would be kind of unbound by fate. And the main reason this is significant is because we already know that his ability to affect fate affects time-based abilities like time stop. How these two abilities interact with each other is a little weird, but Pucci should essentially be able to shorten his time erasure. Diavolo would be free from Made in Heaven during the effects of King Crimson, but it's kind of weird to say. I actually do think we'll do this, though. But yeah, that should be how those three go. I really think Dio is in third place. Unlike a lot of people who see that fight in part 3 and go, wow, Dio is really cool. You know, he probably beats up Diavolo. The abilities of Diavolo and Pucci are just way too much. I will say that I would probably give the edge to Pucci in their fight based on physicality. So in terms of how ability works, they both kind of negate each other. So if you do that, and then you go, oh, well, who's stronger and faster? We know that Diavolo struggled to keep up with Silver Chariot. I believe he states that if he didn't have time stop, he wouldn't be able to overcome Silver Chariot's speed. And then he says it truly is fortunate that fate is on his side, or something like that, that he has time stop. If this is the case, then it means that Pucci, who can still kind of deal with Jotaro outside of time stop, is probably taking it. So that's why I have him higher. I think his ability to affect fate is better. Something else to consider about Pucci and the Diavolo fight would be Pucci would be able to accelerate Diavolo's life. We actually see earlier when he used Sea Moon and he touched the eggs outside of the convenience store that he was able to make the eggs turn into hatchlings, or like accelerate the eggs into being hatchlings. So we actually do know that he has the ability to age living organisms. So if he were to start accelerating Diavolo, he would probably kill him, combined with his ability to move outside of accelerated time. It would probably just like speed blitz and age him to death, but we don't see him use it, even though it would have been very easy for him to age Emporio, so it's kind of hard to say if he can or not. But either way, these two are the top, because they can interact with fate. However, Cars is probably the top of the verse right now. Cars is really, really weird. This is why I have a question mark up here. Cars is really weird in how he interacts with JoJo's. So, there's one argument for and against him being able to develop a stand mid-battle. The argument for is that he adapts to anything. And as we know, vampires can attain stands, which means that it should follow that Pillarmen can attain stands too. This means that if he's hit by any stand ability, he'll likely develop the ultimate stand. It's kind of hard to say what that means, but that should just kind of give him the dub. We know he's still alive. Like, during the time acceleration, he was still alive. So, it's kind of hard to say if anyone on this list can kill him. He's literally immortal. So, like, I have no idea what Pucci is going to do to him, as weird as it sounds. The biggest counter to the idea that Ultimate Cars could develop a stand is there's an interview statement from Araki that says that Part 1 and Part 2 characters did have stands, they just weren't shown. And he said specifically that if you went back to Part 2, you would be able to see Hermit Purple wrapped around Joseph. So, if the stand was awakened, and Joseph did try to punch Cars multiple times and he never awakened the stand, you could try to say that Cars couldn't develop a stand. The other thing to know is that stands don't interact with the physical world unless they're willed to, or unless they choose to. So, a good example of this is Holly from Part 3. Holly is actually affected. Holly has her dormant stand the entire series. Like, before and after Part 3, she still has that stand. It's just dormant and it's not affecting her or manifesting itself physically. Kind of like how Hermit Purple would have with Joseph. And if that's the case, even though Jotaro can see stands, he still never sees it on Holly again once it remains or goes back to being dormant. So this means that even stand users can't interact with a stand that isn't manifesting itself. If that's the case, then Cars wouldn't be interacting with that stand. So Cars should be able to just develop like the ultimate stand. The same type of stand as Made in Heaven, if you would. But yeah, this is my goofy, JoJo's main villain tier list. This part's gonna these four are the big problem, right? These four are what people are gonna argue about. I think the rest of this looks good. I don't know what Cars and Kira do to that tier above them, but who knows? I will say, I have not watched all of JoJo's again. I've only ever watched each part once. So if I'm missing out on any distinct scaling, please let me know. The only things I'm pretty solid about are like these two being down here and these two beating Dio. That's like the only things I feel solid about. Is that Made in Heaven and King Crimson beat the world, and that Part 1 Dio and Bites to Dust Kira are the weakest. But other than that, I would love to hear what people think about Whitesnake versus Sea Moon, Doppio versus Kira, Cars versus Part 3 Dio, stuff like that. I think that's very interesting. But yeah. One other note for Dio versus Made in Heaven Pucci, because that's all people really like to argue about, is Made in Heaven Pucci managed to accelerate time so fast that the sun was perpetually out, so the world was constantly lit all around. This didn't affect Jotaro because Jotaro isn't a vampire, but even if Dio has a better time stop, that means that he would still get worn down, and then eventually he would just get melted by the sun. We know that Dio, even though he isn't able to access all of his vampiric abilities, is vulnerable to the sun. So that's another dub for Made in Heaven Pucci against Dio. I think Diavolo is the much more, like, kind of debatable one with Dio, but yeah. I would say that Whitesnake Pucci actually stands a chance against the World Dio, but the time stop is too powerful. He literally had to create a situation where Jotaro had to protect Jolene, which isn't something he could ever do with Dio. And then he also had to use John Gallier to get the disc out of Jotaro when he had time stop. He's simply not pulling that off against Dio. So yeah, this will be the tier list. I'm a pretty nerdy power scaler, but I'm not like the biggest JoJo's guy. I don't really like JoJo's power scaling because it's fucking stupid. But I think the main villains themselves are really interesting just because they're all really cool. I think Doppio is probably my favorite. Either that or Pucci. Maybe I should have put like Part 6 Dio on here for people that don't want to power scale. Because he feels pretty different in that part. I know that there's a story reason, but this should be fine. Oh, and in case you're wondering, we'll just put it in title. We'll just put it in words. What is it? Over Heaven Dio goes here. And this is where Love Train and Wonder of You should go. I haven't read the manga, so I didn't want to put them on here like officially, but they're very powerful abilities. I do think this is probably where they should end up. Just because they deal with forces that are kind of intrinsically tied to like fate, sort of like time. They're just presented much more stronger. So Made Over Heaven though, or Dio Over Heaven, is just ludicrous. It's literally like the apex of the series, you know? There's literally a scene where they're all rushing him, like all the Joestars, and Giorno and Johnny activate GER and Tusk, and he just kind of goes like, no. And I'm going to be real with you, no one on this list can interact with GER or Tusk. So, Dio Over Heaven, yeah, Dio Over Heaven mops the floor with this list. I actually do think that Giorno probably could have stopped Pucci, because Giorno is also affected by fate in verse with Gold Experience Requiem. But yeah, I don't know that much about how Tusk works. I just know that Tusk is one of those conceptual stands where what you see it do isn't really actually comparable to like what it should be able to, because it should literally be infinite. So yeah, I don't know. Closing statements. Jojo fans suck. They're all really gay. Jojo fans, when they see an unsucked penis, you thought it was your boyfriend, but it was Dio. Did Araki forget about how gay Dio and Pucci were for each other? Okay, you know what? More than any of the power scaling, leave below if you think JoJo's is gay on purpose. I've seen a lot of shit about this, but you can't look at people like Squaldo and Tiziana, and like, dude, they're clearly gay. Like, Giorno is like, dude, part 5 Giorno is fucking gay. That's gotta be on purpose, right? Anyways, there we go. I ruined the video, and I made it really awkward at the end, so no good JoJo videos allowed. Alright, I'm losing my train of thought here. Alright. Yeah, this cure probably beats the scars. Bye.